excited to introduce this year's Robach lecturer, Dr. Clara Desser. So as you all are aware, the Robach Lectureship is our big annual public event. It comes with this colloquium as well as tomorrow's talk, and I highly, highly, highly encourage you to show up tomorrow for the big lecture. There will be a fun reception afterwards. Talk with the public, whoever shows up. It should be awesome. So Dr. Clara Desser is a senior scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where she is the former head of the climate analysis section. She's spent most of her career there, and she's been working on topics of global climate variability and change using both observations and Earth system models. And she's been working on an emphasis of the interactions between all of these components, particularly the atmosphere, the ocean, and the cryosphere. Clara Desser was there from the beginning of the large ensembles, which now so many of us use just regularly every day. Clara Desser is the one who pioneered that usage of Earth system model large ensembles. And as we're going to hear today and tomorrow, these are really good for helping figure out what the difference between a forest response is and what the natural variability is. And it's really revolutionized how we do climate science, being able to distinguish these things with large ensembles. Dr. Desser has co-authored over 200 peer-reviewed publications. She's a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, a fellow of the American Geophysical Union, and a fellow of the American Meteorological Society. And one final note, I think of all the speakers that I've heard over the years, something that has always particularly impressed me about Clara Desser's talks is just the extreme clarity and how just all the ideas you come up with are so clear and everything makes sense. And I think it's a real gift how you take such complex science and make it so understandable. So, further ado, excited to introduce Dr. Clara Desser.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. No pressure. Anyway, it's a great honor to come back to this department and meet so many of you this morning, and also look forward to meeting more of you tomorrow, and also tomorrow's evening lecture, which is more daunting to me than giving a research report. But anyway, so thank you for coming, and thank you, Liz, for that introduction. So today I want to talk about a recent project that I led that is now published just in January of this year in Journal of Climate. So a lot of details you can find in the paper, and I'm just going to try to give you my big picture view of the main results. So I think, as many of us know, there was a strong El Niño event 2 winters ago, 23-24, and this talk is about the teleconnections from that event and surprises along the way. So here's a familiar time series of the Niño 3-4 Oceanic Niño SST index from 1950 through almost through 2024. And when we started the study, this was now what that most recent El Niño event looked like. So in boreal winter DJF, it had an anomaly of 1.9 degrees centigrade, which puts it as tying for the 5th warmest El Niño on record in the past 74 years. So a very strong event. And so we were interested, or I was interested, in the teleconnections that would occur along with this event. And I will tell you how this project got started in just a moment, but Steve Yeager in our CGD NCAR lab was doing decadal seasonal predictions. And he had his model had predicted this event very, very well several months ahead of time. And I asked him, what do the teleconnections look like in your predictions? And I was so surprised. So here is what I expected to see. This is a composite of all observational data for the sea level pressure anomalies during past El Niño events, so taking all the ones stronger than 1 standard deviation, and then scaling them by the magnitude of Niño 3-4 for this particular event, which was 1.9 degrees centigrade. So I was expecting to see a a deepening of the North Pacific Aleutian low system. So here comes Steve Yeager, and this is back in October, actually, or beginning of November. He had issued these predictions with the CSM2 CAM6 coupled climate model, and we knew that the model had a very good, was very skilled at estimating ENSO from November 1st initial conditions at predicting what the Niño 3-4 SST index would be in the following winter, DJF. So we had a lot of confidence in his prediction. So I asked Steve, okay, show me the teleconnections. I'd like to know what they look like from his predictions. And here's what he showed me. And I just shook my head and I said, but where is our canonical signature of this specific North American pattern, something we hang our hats on when we know an ENSO event is coming and there's going to be some skillful predictions for the impacts over North America. So I was pretty shocked to see that. And then his prediction also showed this interesting signal in the North Atlantic. And these were both very surprising to me. So one possibility was that this model actually is not, it may be good at predicting the SST anomalies in the El Niño region, but maybe it doesn't do a good job on teleconnections. So to look at that possibility, we had already run a set of AMIP ensembles, meaning we specified to the atmospheric model component the observed SST history, and we do this 10 times, so we have lots and lots of samples, and then I can make the same composite of the model's circulation response to the observed SST anomalies during El Niño events. And that's what I'm showing you in the far right. And it's pretty good. So according to historical, observed SSTs, the model should have given us a good prediction, or should have looked like this composite. So this then became the question for this project. Why are the predicted teleconnections so different from historical precedent? And I should say that the two maps on the right, I have detrended the data before doing the composites, and that's the tip-off that there's something to do with the trend. Okay, so that's how the project got started. I was scratching my head over the lack of this robust, dependable teleconnection signal that we were expecting over the North Pacific that was not part of this prediction system. Okay, so now we have to think about the impact of this changing climate, background climate state that we're in, whether it is changing because of human influence or natural variability aside, it is changing. And that we have to account for when we examine teleconnections from El Niño events. So here is the map of the linear trend in sea surface temperatures. This one is from 1979 to 2024 based on observational data. And this is a pattern that a lot of the community has been fixated on in the last several years because of this interesting cooling that's occurred in the eastern tropical Pacific that is at odds with expectation of the anthropogenically forced warming trend that we might expect. So this pattern has been dubbed the pattern effect, and there's been a lot of work in the community on the implications for this on radiative feedbacks that control transient climate sensitivity. And as I mentioned before, we don't fully understand what are the drivers of this SST trend pattern, but likely, in my view, there are contributions from both anthropogenic forcing. It could be greenhouse gases. It could be anthropogenic aerosols, and internal variability. And Rob Will's paper, I think, is a focal point of discussing these contributions. Okay, so our hypothesis for this study was that the atmospheric teleconnections from this 23-24 El Niño event are being modified by the background SST trend pattern. And we're not the only ones to propose this hypothesis. At the same time as we were doing our work, there was some really nice papers coming out of the the CPC climate group. And then just as after our paper had been through the review process, I came across a really nice study by Zhang et al. I recommend all of these papers for additional information about this event. But I would say we're all kind of on the same page about the importance of accounting for these background SST trends. So what we did in our study, it's primarily a modeling study, but at the end I'm going to bring us to the observations and to the observed teleconnections. But I'm purposefully leaving that for the end because there's a lot of nuance to get through before we get to the actual observations. Okay, so basically we're going to use atmospheric GCM experiments, and we're going to construct a counterfactual version of this event by placing it instead of the climate state that already has this background trend in it. What if it had occurred before the start of this trend, i.e., if it had occurred in, say, 1979, what would the teleconnection patterns have looked like? Okay, so the outline for the talk here. As I say, I'll walk you through what these experiments are, and they are all publicly available if anyone's interested in doing some additional analysis. So we're going to look at the responses to the actual sea surface temperature anomalies that did occur, and then to this counterfactual, if there hadn't been this background trend, what the teleconnections would have been according to the model. And then we'll look at some implications, in particular precipitation impacts over North America. And then I want to discuss what the dynamics are for the teleconnections. And then I'm going to come finally to the interpretation of the observations, and then end with caveats and some conclusions. So everything I'm going to show you are averages over boreal winter, December 2023 through February 2024. Okay, so here are the observed SST anomalies in this winter season, relative to that longer time period, 79 through 2024. This comes from the ERSST V5 data set. It doesn't matter too much which observational data set you use. So if we detrend these data, i.e. form our counterfactual, this is what the SST anomalies would look like. And again, I just want to reiterate how we've done this. So we've taken the actual SST anomalies that are sitting on top of this background trend, and we are placing them in a 1979 world. So that's how I'm defining our counterfactual. So it's not quite a trend. If I detrend it, I would be sitting in the middle of this period. I'm putting it way back at the beginning of the time period. So then if I subtract these two by construction, here's that trend pattern that I showed you. Obviously there are differences between the counterfactual SST pattern and the trend pattern. They have some commonality but opposite sign, which is also going to be important in terms of the teleconnections. And you can see the amplitudes are not that different, except right in the heart of the equatorial eastern Pacific. The amplitudes between the trend and the counterfactual are not that different. So we really have to pay attention to the trend when we look at the teleconnections. Okay, so here is the setup, the design for the atmospheric GCM experiments. I'm using what at the time was the most recent version of the NCAR GCM, the Community Atmospheric Model version 6. And this is all done at 1 degree spatial resolution. And we did a lot of ensemble members to get rid of internal atmospheric variability. So each of our ensemble members we run from the 1st of November 2023. We actually ran them through the end of April 2024. And each of these simulations contains SST anomalies plus the climatology. And then these different members are just initialized with ever so slightly different atmospheric temperatures, 10 to the minus 14 degrees Kelvin perturbations, and that's what creates ensemble spread. And we're using ERSST v5 SST, and we also do include sea ice. It's not shown on these maps, and that comes from the NSIDC sea ice product. So there's a possibility also that radiative forcing plays a role so we conducted 2 sets of 50-member ensembles, for the SST anomalies where we specify the actual anomalies, we use the contemporary radiative forcing, and then for the counterfactual SST anomalies, we used their contemporary radiative forcing in 1979-80. So we can start to parse what is the contribution of changes in radiative forcing versus changes in SSTs. And then finally, we need some control runs. So we, again, 50-member ensembles, and this time we use climatological SST because we know each member can have a different rendition of internal atmospheric variability that we need to average out. And we did 2 control runs, one with radiative forcing at the 23-24 levels, and one with the earlier time period radiative forcing. So this combination, kind of parsimonious combination of runs here, can allow us to separate SST impacts from radiative forcing impacts. And I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so now I'm going to go right to the results. And so for each one of these experiments, we're now going to look at the sea level pressure response to each one of these SST anomaly patterns, according to CAM6. So here is the response to the observed SST anomalies. The stippling is where things are not significant at, I think, the 95th percentile level. And the magnitudes are slightly different, but overall the pattern is very similar to what Steve Yeager's decadal prediction system was showing, i.e. not too much amplitude in this canonical North Pacific region, and also a little bit of a signal in the North Atlantic that's reminiscent of Steve's prediction. So we are consistent with that decadal prediction system. We have 50 ensemble members. We have a lot of confidence in the robustness that this is the model's atmospheric circulation response to the observed SST anomalies. Okay, so what does it look like with a counterfactual? And here's what you get. And that's what I was expecting. So in this case, the maximum amplitude in the center of that purple blob there is 11 hectopascal lowering of the sea level pressure. So a very intense Aleutian low pressure system. and a little bit of a negative NAO signature as well. So by construction, if we subtract these two experiments, this is what the trend pattern gives. So it's almost completely offsetting the expected SST El Niño teleconnection if we hadn't had this background trend occurring. And there's also an indication of an offsetting influence for the NAO. So these are, on the right-hand column, I've obtained these via subtraction. We also then, later in the project, verified that if I just give the model this static SST trend pattern, that I do get this response that you're seeing here. There is some non-additivity, and I'm not going to belabor that in this talk, but there's definitely some non-additivity between the trend and the counterfactual, which is very interesting, but we haven't pursued that for this paper. Okay, so as you might expect, given these very different circulation responses, they're very consequential for climate impacts over North America and Europe. And in a moment, I will show you one of those consequences, that is for precipitation over North America. In the paper, you can see the results for Europe. So as I alluded to before, the way that we've constructed this set of experiments, we can actually now decompose this response into what the radiative forcing alone does in terms of the trend, and what the SST trend produces in terms of teleconnection. So I can mix and match my experiments and get that decomposition. And here I'm showing it to you, and really it's not a surprise to any of us that SSTs are the main controlling factor. Even with 50 ensemble members, you do see a little bit of significant anomalies in the Southern Hemisphere, which may be an ozone-related signature, because ozone had some stratospheric ozone did change over this time period, and then a little bit of something near the Aleutian Islands and a little bit in the North Atlantic. So that's all very interesting, but it pales in comparison to the amplitude that you get from the SST forcing. So it's really, the story is it's an SST impact, not a radiative forcing impact. Okay, so now I'll just show you, as I said, the consequences for precipitation over North America. So here is the ensemble mean response of the 50 members to the actual SSTs in 23-24. And there's a lot of stippling, meaning not significant. You can see some drying over Oregon and Washington and southern British Columbia, and then wetter conditions over Alaska, and then in the far southeast US. Okay, so how does this now break down in terms of the counterfactual and the trend? So if we didn't have the trend, so this would be the El Niño in the absence of that trend. And now you can see, a more familiar pattern if one knows about how El Niños affect precipitation over North America, a wetter California, wetter southeast US, and then drying over part of the Ohio River Valley and where we're sitting today, and then part of the Canadian and US Great Plains. And then here's the counterfactual, here's the response obtained by subtraction to the SST trends. And again, not surprisingly, given what we saw before with the circulation, these two maps, the middle and the right, are largely offsetting. And in particular, if you're sitting over California, it's a wash, or at least according to our significance levels, between the enhanced precipitation that comes from the the counterfactual El Niño versus the impact of the trend. So I'm going to show you for this box over California the distribution or the histograms of the signals across all the 50 members, just so we get an idea of the spread across the ensemble members. So here I'm showing for each one of these cases, the gray bars are the just counting up across the 50 control runs, climatological SSTs, what California precipitation anomalies could have been just from internal atmospheric variability. And there's a large spread in the gray bars. That's number one. Important always to be cognizant of that. But then you can see the colored bars are showing you the 50 members of the actual, with the SST anomalies included. And again, consistent with the maps that you're seeing, the counterfactual has this, wetter tail compared to the climatological control runs. And the trend set has a more negative tail compared to the control runs. So consistent with what I'm showing you in the maps, but nice to see what kind of spread there is across the members. Okay, so that's really the main story. And now I just want to go into the dynamical mechanisms. And we've gone pretty deeply in the paper. We show a lot about the Rossby wave source and decomposing that. I'm not going to, it's too just messy to show it all. It's in the paper. But I will show you kind of more schematically what the dynamical mechanisms are. So first, we had to ask the question, all of the experiments I've shown you so far, that's done with global SST anomalies. So what is the role of the tropics? And then what are the role of intrabasin contrasts amongst the tropical oceans? So we've repeated our SST anomaly experiments, 50 members, using just specifying SST anomalies in the tropics, 28 north to 28 south with a little bit of a buffer zone poleward, and then climatology elsewhere. So this will not be news to most of you, but here are the responses for each one of the cases. On the top is what you saw before. That's the response to the global SSTs. And the bottom is the response to the tropical SSTs. And the numbers are showing you the pattern correlations between the two. And the upshot is most of what you're seeing in the global, in the response to global SST anomalies is derived from the influence of tropical SST anomalies. So not a surprise. In the paper, we do the subtraction and show that there is some modest influence of higher latitude SST anomalies, which is interesting. But we also have to remember this is a 1-degree model. It is not resolving fine-scale structures in the SSTs, which might be important for the higher latitude impacts. Okay, so then we had to ask the big question, what are the relative roles of the tropical SST anomalies in the Pacific sector versus in the non-Pacific sector, i.e. the Indo-Atlantic? So we repeated our experiments, just dividing the basins just into two pieces. I didn't want to get too detailed. So we repeated our tropical SST experiments, 50 members again, where we only, in the blue, only prescribed the anomalies in the tropical Pacific domain, and then the other set only prescribing the anomalies in the tropical Indo-Atlantic, and then elsewhere there is climatological SST. So we're just interested in, Pacific versus non-Pacific impacts. Okay, so here we go. So now I'm dividing, it's maybe a little bit tricky, but these are the responses to the actual SST anomalies, but the top in the red box, that's going to be just the SST anomalies occurring in the tropical Indo-Atlantic where those boxes are, and then in the bottom, just the response to the tropical Pacific. So you can immediately see that those two parts of the tropics they're doing a lot of the cancellation. And then the question is how much of that cancellation is occurring with the counterfactual versus the trend. And maybe you can anticipate the answers, but here we're demonstrating formally with our 50-member ensembles. With the counterfactual SSTs, the deepening of the elution low and that NAO-like response is really coming from the tropical Pacific SSTs with a little bit of an offset due to the Indo-Atlantic. And then the trend component, again, obtained via subtraction, the Indo-Atlantic SSTs are giving you most of that signal, and then there's a little bit of interesting offset from the trend in the tropical Pacific. So here's the kind of take-home message that it's the combination, it's the combination of the Indo-Atlantic SST trend and the counterfactual Pacific SST anomalies that is producing the full offsetting impact between the two basins. And I just had a note here that if I've then done the experiment where I specify the trend components directly using other additional 50-member ensembles for each of the basins, and I get pretty analogous results. But you can already see that there is some non-additivity between, if you add these two up, we don't quite recover the response to the full tropical SSTs. So with this experimental design, there is some non-additivity. I'm not going to show you that explicitly, but it's there and important to know about. Okay, so teleconnection dynamics. So why do we get that high pressure response to the tropical Indo-Atlantic SSTs? And as we know from our theory, sort of a chain of events here, or at least the way I see it. So you can begin with a pattern of SST anomalies, and of course the system is coupled, ocean-atmosphere coupled, but if you specify a given SST anomaly pattern, you get a precipitation response, and then of course complexities in the vertical heating profiles associated with that. And then that can, through divergence, produce a Rossby wave source, and then alter the wave activity flux, and then finally you get to your teleconnection, Rossby wave teleconnection response. So all of these links in the chain are in the paper. I'm going to show you an abbreviated version that is more palatable in the next few slides. And I'm going to focus on the interesting thing, which was the role of the tropical Indo-Atlantic SSTs. Okay, so so you've seen this before, so now I'm just explicitly showing you these are the observed SST anomalies where I'm just masking the Pacific. So it's just, this is what occurred in the tropical Indo-Atlantic. And this is how the model's precipitation responded. I'm just, for ease of viewing, I'm just showing you the tropical precipitation response so the maps don't get too cluttered as I go along. So this is what we see. And then when we look at the counterfactual, the response to the counterfactual SST anomalies, we see this response, and then finally, by subtraction, this is what we see here. So now I'm going to point out the interesting things, at least that popped out to me. The first is that there is a local response to the Indian Ocean SST anomalies in all three of these maps. And then there's a little bit of a response in to the tropical Atlantic SSTs, but not as strong as what we see in the Pacific. And then what I found most interesting was this remote response of the precipitation on either side of the equator, a drying response to the SSTs, that there's no SST anomalies in that far western Pacific, yet some of the biggest precipitation anomalies are occurring in that region. And this was very reminiscent to me from some much older work that I had done, and Hurling et al. And many other studies, that if you just give an atmospheric model a heating anomaly in the Indian Ocean, you can produce this, zonal teleconnection, like a local Walker circulation, and produce drying in this western Pacific. And I was wondering, why is it so strong in the western Pacific? And I just was wondering whether the climatology has an influence here. So the climatological precipitation in response to climatological SSTs in this model has the strongest precipitation or rainfall zones in this western tropical Pacific. And it's very much co-located where we have the drying signal. And perhaps that's just sort of a hand-waving, explanation for why the anomalies are so strong in that region. So here we come back to the precipitation. And now I'm going to superimpose for you the teleconnection. And I'm going to show you the upper level meridional wind anomalies. So at 250 hectopascal, it just outlines the pathways very, very nicely. So these are the purple contours, and the dashed would be a negative or a northerly wind anomaly, and the solid contours would be a southerly or positive wind anomaly. And then just for ease of viewing, I've just drawn by eye what I see as possible Rossby wave trains. And I think, there's some evidence that, perhaps it's not just a single wave train emanating from this drying in the far western Pacific, but this Indian Ocean maybe also has a sort of longer or more poleward propagating Rossby wave path. And you can see that there's very little influence in the counterfactual SST anomalies from the Indo-Atlantic, consistent with the lack of sea level pressure response. So I guess, the sort of take-home, without belaboring the Rossby wave sources, which are in the paper, the take-home is that tropical Indo-Atlantic SST warming trends, and I think it's mainly the Indian Ocean, drive teleconnections to the North Pacific and into the North Atlantic via a non-local precipitation response, a drying in the western tropical Pacific. So it was a little bit surprising and interesting result according to this model. Okay, so I want to end now with this next set piece of the analysis, which is comparison with the observations. And the reason why I brought it in now is that one always has to be, thoughtful about how we compare models and observations. And up till now, I've shown you model results, and specifically how the model responds to SST anomalies. And I can do this because I run so many ensemble members that I can average out internal atmospheric variability. But in observations, we don't have that luxury. We have one rendition. And so in observations, one always has to be cognizant that one is seeing an SST force response in combination with internal atmospheric variability. So even if the model has, correct physics and the SST forced response, the observations, if the observations differ from the model's SST forced response, it doesn't necessarily say that the model is incorrect. It just says that maybe there's some additional contribution from the roll of the dice of the internal atmospheric variability. Okay, so that was a build-up. Okay, all right, so here now I'm showing you the observed sea level pressure anomalies taken from the ERA5 reanalysis for the actual, what actually occurred, and then doing this detrending back to 1979-80, and then the subtraction, which is giving me the trend. And then the lower maps are showing what I showed in the beginning of the SST forced response to global SST anomalies according to the CAM6 model. And, things don't have to look perfect, but it's quite validating of the model, I would say, that one sees this the same idea that, in the actual observations, that there was a lot of counteracting influence between the detrended, or I'm calling the counterfactual world, and the trend over the North Pacific. So a lot of cancellation between those two components that then add up to make what actually occurred. And then maybe, there's a hint that there's some opposite signed anomalies for the NAO as well, but it's not quite as pronounced. So as I alluded to before, you can ask, this is one roll of the dice, one realization, if you will. Here, this is actually made up of 50 of them. So we can ask, does the ensemble spread encompass the observed, the observations? And if it does, then, at least according to that metric, one has a credible model. So here, I like to show this, what I call rank plots. So I'm just asking at each grid box, I have the value of the sea level pressure anomaly that was observed or in the reanalysis, and I'm just asking where does it lie within the 50 members from the model. And where you see white, that means it lies within the 5th to 95th percentile of the 50 model runs, which i.e. There's no discrepancy between the one realization in observations and the 50 in the model. And obviously, white is good in terms of model performance, and you can see that we have, very good, or the observations lie well within the plausible ensemble spread for sea level pressure. Okay. And then I'll show you finally the precipitation. This is from GPCP. It's the best I could do in terms of long satellite records. And again, the model is far from perfect, that's for sure. But again, roughly speaking, I mean, there's some definitely biased equatorial patterns, but the same idea of this Western Indian Ocean wetting, drying on either side of the equator in the Western Pacific, and then enhanced precipitation in the Central Pacific. That's roughly similar to the model world, but there is a biased pattern for sure. And then somewhat of an offset between the trend component of the precipitation and the counterfactual. And then in terms of where the observations lie within the ensemble spread of the model, you can see the model is not doing as well. There are definitely some regions where, the model is very clearly biased. So we do have to, take that into account when we analyze this model. And then lastly, I'm going to show you the precipitation over the US. This is from GPCC now. And I've looked at other products, and they give very similar results. And again, the results are quite analogous to what we're finding from the SST forced response in the model, i.e. an offsetting of the impacts between the counterfactual and the trend, not only over the southwest US, but also over the southeast US. And in terms of where the observations lie within the spread of the model, you can see that there is, according to this metric, we have a very credible model. Okay, so I'm going to come to my take-home messages, which I hope I've made a simple, clear story that this pattern of long-term tropical SST trends, at least since 1979, counteracted the expected teleconnections from the 23-24 El Nino via Rossby wave dynamics, and that this offsetting effect was driven by warming of the tropical Indo-Atlantic, and I think mainly the Indian Ocean, through remote impacts on precipitation over the western tropical Pacific. And then if we decompose the observed teleconnections, we find largely analogous results to the SST-forced model responses, with, of course, internal atmospheric variability also accounting for much of the remaining differences. And then, of course, open questions. Any interesting study gives you open questions that you wish you had answered. And I hope to pursue this in the future, or happy to turn the experiments over to anyone who's interested. But what mechanisms underlie this non-additivity of the tropical Pacific and Indo-Atlantic responses, and do other models behave in a similar fashion? And then at the time we did this work, we could speculate that when we have a La Nina event, we might expect enhanced teleconnections due to the SST trend pattern. And a couple weeks ago, I just reviewed a paper that looked at this using the NMME predictions, and sure enough, for the La Nina that followed this El Nino event in the winter of 24-25, they found that the teleconnections were enhanced due to the trend. So the upshot is, I think we have to, we're now in this world of changing, evolving base background climate, and we can no longer depend on historical precedent of these teleconnections, because they are being modified by that background SST trend. And then finally, the big money question: how long will this current SST trend pattern last? And that has all to do with what are the causes for the trend pattern, and how much is forced and how much is internal. And even if it's forced, the mix of forcing agents and the delays within the climate system could alter this SST trend pattern in the coming decades. So thanks so much. Happy to have questions.
Okay, let's take a question first from students. Evan.
Hi, Clara.
Hi,
great
Evan.
talk. I have a kind of involved question. So I've been looking at the teleconnection response to tropical Pacific anomalies in SMILE in the coupled system. And what I found so far is that it seems like a decent amount of the response, and what we found is that the teleconnections are much weaker, which actually, that lines up with what you showed at the very beginning. But what I found is that in the coupled system, it seems like it very quickly wants to go to whatever the teleconnection patterns within the free-running CESM look like, and that transition seems to weaken the influence of the tropics onto the extratropics. And so that answer to this seems like more of a model adjustment issue.
Right.
And what you're showing here, I think, is a very strong argument that there's a dynamical issue. So.
Right. This is observed SSTs.
Yeah.
This is not the coupled system.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess the question is, does the CAM6 when it's being forced by these prescribed SSTs, like, are the teleconnection patterns, do they look realistic in general, or in these like climatological cases that you're running, and does that have any influence on this? These answers?
I don't know where my PowerPoint went. Huh, where did it go? Oh, you see it here. Okay, good. So that's what I tried to show at the very beginning. Let me just get my slide. Yeah, here it is. Now we'll do slide. Oh, this is so weird. Okay, here we go. Far right.
Mm-hmm.
That's, all right, these AMIP runs. So we're giving it observed SSTs from 1900 to 2020, compositing all the same El Nino events that we've done, composited for the observations. And then we have 10-member runs, so multiplying all the sample size by 10. So I think the model does very well. And I've written a couple papers, maybe 5, 6 years ago, on how well do we know ENSO teleconnections, and how do we evaluate models accordingly. And so that's all to do with, given the sample size that we have from observations, how confident are we in this pattern? And we're not that confident, actually. But that aside, I think this answers your question. And that was a question I had, of course, at the beginning.
This makes me very interested in looking within SMILE, because
Yeah.
I've been doing regressions over the course of the entire series, of looking if you can see the same difference, where if there's El Nino events predicted early on versus later, and that,
Cool.
that shows up within SMILE.
Okay, we can talk more about that. Nice.
Next question. John.
Great talk, Clara.
Thank you, John.
Liz is exactly right.
Oh.
This is outside my wheelhouse, but you made it clear, so thank you so much. One of the things I'm really interested in is we just had a 2-week period in Hawaii
Yep.
where things were crazy.
I know.
It looks to me like it was forced by the trend. Because there's a big anticyclone at the surface, there's probably equivalent barotropic, and so there's a retracted jet across the Pacific. Invasion
Wow.
from the northwest of extratropical disturbances is then allowed. So I wonder if there's that might be one primary way in which the day-to-day weather gets in the muck of this when you've got the trend in the background. So I saw that right away. It seems really interesting. And it even showed up in your precipitation anomalies, just south of Hawaiian Islands in the model.
I know.
Was a big positive anomaly.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I was just talking with Steph about it, and Jerry Meal, I don't know if people know that name, but yeah, so he has been in Hawaii. He's a scientist at NCAR. He has been in Hawaii for the last 3 to 4 weeks, and it's pouring. And, I mean, really pouring. 40 inches, I think, of rain up in the higher elevations. And the Kona low, which is very persistent and very strong, is driving that.
Yeah.
And he thought it might be forced from tropical Western Pacific. I don't know. I haven't looked at what the precipitation looks like.
Some of the components, at least, of the trend influence look like that's going on.
Wow. And further, he suggested that maybe this Kona low is actually then part of the Rossby wave train that's enhancing the ridge over the western U.S., which has led to, unprecedented warmth. I mean, we just had 92 degrees in Boulder. I mean,
don't doubt
never
that
been
there
happened.
like that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think we have to really pay attention to this, this Indian Ocean bathtub-like warming. I mean, just warming, just almost at a steady rate. over the last 100 years.
Yeah, and your results also suggest that any analysis like I did in my group years ago with Jason Hopkins, did some really beautiful work on the Kona Low. And
Oh, okay.
they got to be rethought because maybe if we said there's no connection to El Nino, but El Nino is not the only player that drives some of those anomalous signals, and that's clear in your work.
Please send me your papers of the Kona Low. I'm super interested.
Steph?
This was really interesting. Thank you so much for your talk. This was great. So have you looked at if there is a trend or a change in the waveguides, the jet?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember what I have in the paper. Yes, I have, because and the jet is retracted, as you say, with the trend, but I haven't decomposed the Rossby wave source into the component that is due to the change in the jet versus due to the change in the vorticity stemming from the precipitation anomaly further south. I think that would be a great thing to do, but I haven't. Yeah, I agree. We can talk more about that too. That'd be great. Dan?
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
CPC, with the current forecast for the INSO event, it's a little early for them to be issuing a teleconnection forecast, but is this influencing their?
I don't.
Any idea what is influencing the thoughts of the signal forecast?
Actually, I don't have any idea, and I want to engage with the people there to see, because Michelle Dereux, I think she's a big fan of this study, and they have related work, and great. I'm sure that is in their minds, and Nat Johnson as well. But I don't. Yeah, I wonder. They've now gone to the relative ONI index, and I don't know actually. That's probably. Well, I don't know. It's probably altering the magnitude a little bit of the El Nino event, probably not a huge amount. Yeah, but the relative Niño index, that's where you take Niño 3.4 minus the tropical mean, that I don't think tells the whole story because, as I was saying to some other people, it's the pattern of the SST anomaly trend that's super important, because if the Indian Ocean is the primary driver of that offsetting teleconnection, it's going to be, that'll be more impactful than the tropical mean SST trend, although both would play a role. So it's really that trend pattern that's important, I think. Yeah, good question. Yeah, thank you.
Brad?
Do you think that the SST trend has become significant enough that this 2023-24 one was the first time that you expected it to occur, or do you see that in the 2015 one?
I know. Great question. And when 2015 came around, people scratched their heads because it was not a canonical El Nino. I meant to go back and look at that, and actually it would be nice to do some runs for that event. And I think there were a lot of hypotheses out there. Is it overwhelmed by internal atmospheric variability? Is it, was the El Nino itself not canonical in its SST anomaly distribution? I haven't actually touched on that in this talk, but the SST anomalies during this event, I think I have them here, sorry, to go through. Okay, there it is. Actually, I'm not showing it, and I don't have it in the paper, but I did a lot of work decomposing this counterfactual. If you project it on the detrended composite, doesn't line up perfectly. And the Indian Ocean comes out more strongly, the Atlantic. So there's also then, that each El Nino is a different flavor, if you will. But I'm guessing that the trend may be part of why 2015 El Nino teleconnection was not in line with the expectation. Yep.
So I'm wondering, thinking about the internal atmospheric variability and other things on S2S time scales during the winter, thinking about the stratosphere.
Yeah.
So I know that there's been some work that's looked at the impact of El Niño on Europe.
Yep.
Related to if, and winters with and without an SSW.
Right.
We saw this big signal that like there's the stratospheric
Yep.
pathway. So I'm wondering if in that internal atmospheric
Yeah.
variability, if how many of the ensembles had
Yeah.
that stratospheric variability versus those that didn't, and
Yeah.
is that percentage changing? Is
That would be
that-
an awesome thing to look at in these runs. Yeah, I did some work with Lorenzo Polbani
Okay.
on that. Yeah, and we did the decomposed ENSO teleconnections with those that had SSWs and those that didn't. But we haven't done it for these. Yeah, I'd be interested in that NAO response that I
Yeah.
was surprised about in Steve Yeager's predictions that we also got in this. But yeah, how much the stratosphere played a role. Good question.
With that, let's thank Dr. Jesser one last time.
Thank you.